She did. Yeah.
Now you need a target.
So you have no control over mute or anything.
Yeah, I do. It's up here.
Oh,
I guess.
There we go.
you put it on when he's talking.
It's Marta in communications. She's in charge of everything.
So where are you located?
I'm actually in Maria's house with her in Saskatoon.
Okay.
Great, thank you very much, Zach.
I couldn't tell. I couldn't
Okay.
tell because I can't see much for the background. It's all blurred.
Okay, we'll start now. Welcome everyone to this live session featuring a conversation with Terry Lusty and Maria Campbell. My name is Priscilla Campo and I'm the current head of Naskatchewan, which is our Indigenous Knowledge Center here at Athabasca University. This week marked the first time that the Truth and Reconciliation Day was introduced into our worlds, and it coincided with the Orange Shirt Day, a day to acknowledge and remember all lives lost and affected by residential schools. Today, we will listen to Maria and Terry discuss the importance of storytelling in the culture of Indigenous people. Each will have about 20 minutes to present their topics. Then we will go through a few questions that were previously submitted. I'm going to ask Maria to begin our session, and I'm offering her ribbons and tobacco to begin the session, and then we're going to hand it over to Terry to do the first of the talk, and then Maria will do her session, her talk, and then I will ask the questions that were previously submitted by our participants. Maria?
Thank you. Hello to everybody out there. It's really good to see all of you. It's good to see you, Terry. And it's such a beautiful day out there today, or at least it looks beautiful from here, from inside of my kitchen. I haven't stuck my head outside yet. But Priscilla gave me some ribbon and tobacco, and I'd like to just offer a short words of gratitude for the day, and in however way that each of you do that, I ask you to join me, and to also just think about, we came through Orange Shirt Day yesterday, and this week it's been, reflecting on truth and reconciliation, and think about those things and try to think about them, as I say every time I talk to all of you, to think about our children, all of us, from whatever culture we come from, that together we can create change to make a better world for all of our children, because all of this is the inheritance that we're going to be leaving them. And it's something that we all need to think seriously about. So however you speak to Creator, I'll let you do that. I'm going to do the prayer in Cree. Hauki magat again, Kiranaskum, Ego Kepemiogi Sigaganot, Yogan Memiasik, how we hear. Kinaskum Ninap Matsuin. Bear we here, Omanot. We Chihinan, Nicoitim Dan, Xemanto, Kakanwemia. Kawichi here, Gracekan, Mameskanal, Kagosit, the Moa, Gokjoas, Missinoak. Omatoske and Gato the Mark. Oh my guys, Mama, Atoskeak. Wichehenan elgoquest katutama kamiasik miskanonik ka kausitamawaakuk. Timageimnan ay manais komasko katutama atoskeun. Snawaturam ko katoskeak. Wichehenan kamskamakan hikwesk kapachihtaak. Joka mamtune maa kekahkiok joasimsnoak. Kinaskum mgawieski hiko kemiuna kuhtsikeen. Uitsehenaan niistenaan nikussikais. Kakoisnas petataak. Ego minä nohkom nottavaa johkan kista minä kinaskum. Te uitap minä numa kaui pikskoja kanotsi. Uitsehenaan. Timageimnaan. Mossomakan ne oppiik, skohteimäkäken vehtäme kistohamina. Emi assaka pepihtä voimakaa, kispen piitos, kuitsem nano megastain. Haunohtaui, kenenaskomten. Hei hei.
Thank you, Maria. Now I'll ask Terry to start off our session on his story.
Take me off there.
Reconciliation Day is, it's always an important day for me. Every year, I always try to make it to a couple of events. And, I combine actually attending these for my own personal reasons as a residential school survivor, and also as a storyteller, because events that I attend, very often quite often I write them up and take photographs and print them in one of the native papers. And this is, an important element in our world around us, because we need to keep those stories alive. And we live in an era where, a lot of the word of mouth is still very predominant in our native circles. The whole thing of getting information just from the internet and, through the modern technology does not work for all our people. So the printed word and the vocalizations, the audio, getting the messages out by those means are still very, very critical. So many of our people do not have laptops. They do not have internet. They don't have phones. They can't even text. And so, those who do, some of them very limited in what they can do. So to get any of our messages or points across, to share our stories with other people and information, not just stories, but information as well, and resources, because all of these are, everyday importance to people. You have to be able to tap in to all those different sources, and that's the one thing I really like about getting out and about with different functions and events. And it doesn't matter if they're political, educational, sports, whatever it may be, they're all important. They all help us grow and develop and become who we are. And we can't do that unless people who have that capability are out there doing their thing, you know. So in my case, I continue on the road of a lot of doing photojournalism, of doing talks at conferences and talking circles, different organizations. And of course, by and large, most all of the talks, I have a very broad background in terms of involvements, so I can speak on many different topics and issues. And I find that a real asset, because if I'm in front of people or a crowd, it's like the entertainer who's out there singing. You got to learn to read your audience and find out what they want, what they're looking for. You know, you always have ideas of what, you know, the kind of information you want to parlay over, but you've got to discover what it is they need, okay? And you can't do that unless you connect with your audience. So that's what I generally try to do. And then that way I can play it by ear and pick up on whatever area I feel needs addressing. A good example was yesterday when I went to the Orange Shirt Day walk down in the river valley here in Edmonton. Beautiful day for it. Hundreds of people participating. And when we got towards the end, and a couple of us delivered a talk about reconciliation and residential school, and how it was for us as survivors, I picked up that they really wanted to hear our personal story, what it was like for us being in that system, how it impacted us, and how we managed to move forward. And that's always been such a difficult task for so many of our survivors, is that thing of moving forward, because they didn't have the resources behind them, you know, to help them along on that road. And you know, it's one of the things I'm proud of sharing, because and you know, because it's a means of putting the truth out there and impressing upon the people the significance, the importance of accepting that information for what it is, that it is in fact the truth, you know. And it took so long, like we talk about these, you know, unmarked graves at Kamloops, at Cowessess, and among other places. And even right here locally, there are places. And we need to share our stories about why that kind of situation existed, and how was our resilience, our strength, our own personal courage, and, you know, tenacity to move forward and carry on and come out of those residential schools being a good person, and also recovering from those schools what we had lost, since they took so much away from us and barely left us with anything at all, you know. And One thing that a lot of people don't realize is that for many of us in those residential schools who the hurt of loneliness was forever with us. I remember how I used to hang on those school fences at the front yard one day of the month when parents or guardians could come and pick up their kids to take them for a half-day outing. And me, I'd always be left in the dust, still clinging to that fence, wondering, when is somebody going to come for me? And nobody ever came. And nobody came all my life. All my life. Not one single relative came into my life. That's not a way for a child to grow up. That's why I say there were a lot of us who, we never had a childhood. We never knew things. It was like things, did you get a Christmas present? Did you get a birthday present? Well, no. Speaking of birthdays, we never even got a cake. We never even got a card. We never even got a well wish or acknowledgement. Hey, you guys, today is so-and-so's birthday. Let's sing happy birthday. Not even that. And that's why when we had the 7th and final national TRC gathering here in Edmonton, downtown, when those kids from Prince Charles got up there with their fiddles and their voices and sang happy birthday to all of us survivors, I was just, I was choked up. That was such a high, but it was a pleasant high because they brought something to us that we had been denied for so many years, and we lived without that acknowledgement. So there's a lot of sad stories out there, but there's some good ones too, and we need to tell both. We have to give it some balance. We had things that did make us happy at times. Some of the games and activities that we would conjure up in our minds and then implement them with the other kids, and that was great. Some of it would have been, for some people, would have been insulting, like when we used to escape from the yards at nighttime on Halloween and go over to the cemetery and then defy other kids to go in that little house where they kept all the bodies. Well, we were just kids. We didn't know any better, but we had to make up our own forms of entertainment, No comics, no TV, no radio, no crayons, nothing. So yeah, it's not easy times, but yeah, it's good to share that stuff. Like say, hi.
Thank you, Terry, for sharing that with us. We are now going to move on to Maria's presentation, and here she is.
Again, thank you for having me. And I just want to say very briefly that how important this week is for all of us, and to reflect about what's happened and to honor the people who've come through this. I don't, I've been talking so much about it this week. I'm kind of run out of words, and I just was notified that there's been a death of somebody that I'm really close to, a few minutes ago, and I'm not really up to talking a whole lot. So what I want to do is read a story that was given to me by an elder many years ago, and which was published in the book Stories of the Roadlands People. In case any of you haven't seen it, it's a collection of oral stories. These were given to me by elders in Saskatchewan and one from Alberta. The story I want to share with you is called Jacob, and this was an old man from my family who went to residential school, but he was all in the First World War and in the Second World War, and he also went to Korea. He never married, never had children. He kind of adopted all of our big extended family, as you know, all of us kids. He was a wonderful storyteller. He was somebody who suffered a great deal in school and had a really difficult time, and I guess somehow he was able to handle the war better than a lot of people because of his experiences there, because he was he was brutalized while he was in school. And so I want to read the story called Jacob, and it was a story that he shared with us. And before I do that, I want to say that, and I don't have time, we don't have the time for me to read the introduction, but I wanted to talk a little bit about storytelling and traditional copyright. And that's to always, traditional copyright is recognized by first for me to talk about how I got the story and then to introduce the story. So I just want to read the first part of my introduction, and I'm reading this rather than telling the story, because when I tell it, I usually do it in Cree or in Michif, but when I read it, I do it in English. I remember a warm kitchen on a stormy winter night. I'm sitting on the floor with my chichim and the old ladies. The room is full of grandpas, mamas and papas, aunties, uncles and cousins. There is laughter, hot sweet tea, and the smell of red willow tobacco. Long ago, the old men told us the story, my uncle would begin, and my chichim and the old ladies would puff their clay pipes and nod, tapwe, tapwe. Yes, it's true. This was the first snowfall and the first night of storytelling in the little Roadlands village where I grew up. If someone knocked on our door, my papa would call out, "Tawao bebitagwe, come in, there's room." My mama would pour another cup of hot tea and people would make room for the visitor who would lean forward and become a part of our circle. Today, the stories I heard then I have learned, and I've been given permission to share them with you. They are old men's stories. I had hoped when I became a student of storytelling that I would get old women teachers, but that was not meant to be. The old women were kind. They made me pots of tea, cooked me soup in bannock, made me star blankets and moccasins, and sent me off to the old men who became my teachers. I am a very inexperienced storyteller compared to the people who taught me, and although I speak my language, I have had to relearn it, to decolonize it, or at least begin the process of decolonization. This has not been an easy task, and the journey has taken many years. I have paid for the stories by relearning and rethinking my language, and by being a helper or servant to the teachers. I have also paid for the stories with gifts of blankets, tobacco, and even a prize Arab stallion. With the stories, I've had lifetimes of stuff put into my memory. I am not even sure what it all is, but the teachers say, don't worry about it, just think that your brain is the computer you use and we are the people typing it in. When you need it or you've had the experience to understand it, your spirit will give it to you. I have learned to trust them, and it is in this spirit that I share these stories with you. I give them to you in the dialect and rhythm of my village and my father's generation, and I'm responsible for all of the mistakes. So this story is called Jacob. And it's in the dialect of my community. Some people call this Kringlish or Cree English or Village English. But for us, it's I never heard that term until I saw it written in some books. Mr. Butt, he was my grandmother, and I'm going to be using he a lot here because this is how the people in our community talk, because our language is genderless. If we're talking about a man or a woman, we say their names. Otherwise, we call everything he or everything she. So, Mr. Butt, he was my grandmother. He come from Muskeg. That was before he was a reservation. My grandmother, he was about 28 when he married my grandfather. That was real old for a woman to marry in them days. But he was an Indian doctor. I guess that's why he waits so long. Oh, he was a good doctor too. All the peoples, they say that about him. He doctored everybody that come to him, and he birthed all the babies too. Just about everybody my age, you know, my grandmother, he birthed them. He married my grandfather around 1890. That old man, he come to him for doctoring, and when he get better, he never leave him again. They get married the Indian way, and after that, my grandfather, he helped him with all his doctoring. That's the way he used to be a long time ago. If the woman he worked, then the man's he helped, and if the man he worked, then the woman's he helped. You never heard people fighting over whose job he was. They all know what they have to do to survive. My grandfather, his name was Kanup, but the white man's, they call him Jim Boy. So his Indian name, he gets lost. That's why we don't know who his people they are. We lost lots of our relations like that. They get the white man's name and then nobody knows what their name is anymore. Sometimes I think that's the reason why we have such a hard time as peoples. Our roots, they get broken so many times. It's real hard to be strong, you know, when you don't got far to look back for help. The white man's, he can look back for thousands of years because he write everything down. But us peoples, we use the remembering and we pass it on by telling stories and singing songs. Sometimes we even dance the remembering. But all this trouble, you know, he start after we get the new names. After we get the new names, he come with a new language and a new way of living. Once, a long time ago, I could have told you the story of my grandfather Kanup and all his peoples, but no more. All I can tell you now is about Jim Boy and his story. He's not very old. Well, my grandmother, Mr. Butt, he never gets a white man's name, him. He knows lots of stories. That old lady, he even knowed the songs. He always used to tell me one about an old man called Jacob. That old man, you know, he don't live very far from here. Well, he's gone now, but this story was about him when he was alive. They have a, he's alive, just a minute here. Jacob, he gets one of the new names when they put him in the residential school. He was just a small boy when he go, and he don't come home for 12 years. 12 years, that's a long time to be gone from your peoples. He can't come home, you know, because the school, he was nearly 200 miles away. His mommy and daddy, they can't go and see him because there's no roads in them days, and the Indians, they don't got many horses, especially to travel that far. That's true, you know, not many peoples in them days, they have horses. It's only in the comic books and the picture shows that they got lots of horses. He was never really like that in the real life. Well, Jacob, he stayed in that school all them years, and when he come home, he was a man. While he was gone, his mommy and daddy, they died, so he got nobody. And on top of that, nobody he knowed him because he got a new name. My grandmother, he say, that old man, he have a hard time. Nobody, you know, he can understand that unless it happens to him. Them peoples that go away to them schools and come back, you know, they really suffer. No matter how many stories we tell, we'll never be able to tell what them schools done to our peoples and all their relations. Well, anyways, Jacob, he was just plain pitiful. He can't talk his own language. He don't know how to live in the bush. It's a good thing the peoples, they was kind, because they help him the very best they can. Well, a couple of summers later, he meets this girl and they get married. That girl, he was kind and real smart too. He teach Jacob how to make an Indian living. They have a good life together, and after a few years, they have a boy. Not long after that, they raised 2 little girls that was orphans. Jacob and his wife, they was good peoples. Both of them, they was hardworking, and all the peoples, they respect them and they come to Jacob for advice. But the good times, they was too good to last, because one day the priests, they come to the village with the policemen. They come to take the kids to school. When they get to Jacob, his house, he tells them they can't take his kids. The priest, he tell him he have to let them go because that's the law. Well, the priest, you know, he have a big book, and in the book, he's got the names of all the kids and who they belongs to. He opened that book and asked Jacob for his name, and then he look it up. Jacob, he says, you know better, you went to school, and you know that the education, he's important. My grandmother, Miss Apache, say, Jacob, he tell that priest, yes, I go to the school, and that's why I don't want my kids to go. All there is in that place is suffering for them. The priest, he wasn't happy about that, and he say to Jacob, but the peoples, they have to suffer, Jacob, because the Jesus Christ, he suffer. But the Jesus, he never lose his language and his people, Jacob tell him. He stay home in his own country and he do his suffering. Well, the priest, he gets mad and he tells him it's a sin to think like that, and he's going to end up in purgatory for them kind of words. But Jacob, he don't care, because as far as he's concerned, purgatory, he can't be worse than the hell he lived with trying to learn his language and his Indian ways. He tell that priest he don't even know who his people they are. The Jesus, he knowed his mommy and daddy, Jacob, he tell him, and he always knowed who his people they are. Well, the priest, he tell him if he wants to know who his people they are, he can tell him that, and he opened up that big book again. Your dad's Indian name, he was Achak, the priest, he say. I think that means star in your language. He never gets a new name because he never become a Christian. Jacob, he tell my grandmother that when the priest, he say his dad's name, his wife, he start to cry real hard. Jacob, someday you'll thank the God we done this, the priest, he tell him, and they start loading up the kids in the big wagons. All the kids, they was crying and screaming, and the mothers, they was chasing the wagons. The old women's, they was all singing the death song, and none of the mans, they can do anything. They can't, you know, because the policemen's, they got guns. When the wagons, they was all gone, Jacob, he looked for his wife, but he can't find him no place. An old woman, he see him, and he called to him, Bea benosim. Come and sit down, my grandchild, I must talk to you. He's hard for me to tell you this, but that priest, his big book, he brings us bad news today. He tell you that Achak, he was your daddy. My grandson, he was your wife's daddy too. Jacob, he tell my grandmother he can't cry when he hear that. He can't even hurt inside. That night he go looking and he find his wife in the bush, that woman he kill himself. Jacob, he say the old women, they stay with him for a long time and they sing healing songs and they try to help him. But he say he can't feel nothing. Maybe if he did, he would have done the same thing as his wife. For many years, Jacob, he was like that, just dead inside. The peoples, they try to talk with him, but it was no use. His kids, they growed up and they come home and live with him. I made them suffer, he tell my grandmother. My kids, they try so hard to help me. Then one day his daughter, he gets married and he have a baby and he bring it to Jacob to see. Jacob, he say, he look at that little baby and he start to cry and he can't stop. He say he cried for himself and his wife, and then he cried for his mommy and daddy. When he was done, he sang the healing songs the old women used to sing to him a long time ago. Well, you know, Jacob, he died when he was an old man, and all his life, he write in a big book the Indian names of all the mommies and daddies. And beside them, he write the old names and the new names of all the kids. And for the rest of his life, he fight the government to build schools on the reservations. The good God, he wouldn't have made babies, he would say. He wouldn't have made babies come from mommies and daddies. He didn't want them to stay home. If he wanted them to stay home, excuse me, the good God, he wouldn't have made babies come from mommies and daddies, he used to say, if he didn't want them to stay home and learn their language and their Indian ways. You know, that old man, he was right. Nobody he can do that. Take all the babies away. He's just not right. Long ago, when the old peoples, they used to do the naming and they do all of the teaching too. And the parents, and if the parents, they have troubles, then the aunties and the uncles or somebody in the family, he would help out till the parents, they get their life work done, till they get their life worked out. But no one long ago ever took the babies away from their peoples. You know, my old grandmother, Mr. she have lots of stories about people like Jacob. Good old people that work hard so things will be better for us. We should never forget those old people. We should never forget about them. And that's dedicated to the friend that I just lost today. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Terry. So to wrap it up today, we're going to go through the questions that were submitted previously this past week, once people viewed Terry's story online and once they looked over Little Badger, and now today the story of Jacob. And so the questions revolve around conciliation and how to work towards that. So the question I'm going to ask is the first question I'll ask is, how can non-Indigenous people show their support for the recommendations of the TRC and conciliation generally? And so Terry, I'd like you to address that first, and then I'll move on to Maria.
Well, there's one thing that a lot of Canadians don't do, and that is connect with the different levels of government. And, you know, that's an important part of our moving forward. We have to, because a lot of these actions involve our governments. It involves financial support for different kinds of programs and projects and education services, health services, many different areas. So there, who do you get after? You get after the politicians. So submit, don't just talk about it with other people. Get down and pen, write letters, type letters, you know, email these memos and get them to the politicians at the local level, the provincial level, and the federal level. Go after your MLAs and your MPs and say that, hey, you know, we want to be part of this. And what are you doing about it? And how come there is still such a discrepancy? How come there are still all these things that are wrong that are going on in society and not being addressed? You know, because 94 calls to action, how many have the government touched on? The last count that I heard was 10. That's 6 years ago now. And only 10 calls to action addressed? Something wrong with that picture. So you other people need to get after them.
Thank you, Terry. Maria, do you want to add to that?
No, I'll take another question.
Okay, thank you, Terry. So I'm going to do one that's specific for Maria. And as we all know, she wrote the book Half-Breed in 1973. So Maria, if you were writing Half-Breed today, rather in 1973, do you think it might be different, and how?
I don't think it would be that different because there hasn't been a whole lot of changes. Things have become more modern. But when I look back over the past 50 years, there's not been a lot of changes. It's, you know, we have more young people in universities graduating. We have a few faces of those graduates in universities, but it's still not enough people. Our curriculums haven't been changed that much. I remember working on curriculums like about 20 years ago, and walking into the Department of Education and seeing most of them still sitting there. Nothing had become of them, and asking teachers why they weren't being used, and they said they didn't really know how to use them. So I don't think there would have been, you know, it would have been different in that maybe I would have been writing from a more aware place than I was then. You know, I didn't know how many women were missing and murdered, for example. I know that today, and I know that there are more than there ever was in 1973, that it's worse. Just last week in Saskatoon alone, I turned the radio on and found out that in that week we lost 6 people to murder and young women that were missing. So I don't know. I've been an activist for most of my adult life, and sometimes I feel really tired, and I wonder how long it's going to change, you know, because even with reconciliation, there's lots of money being spent on events and things, but how much has really changed for children in our country, for Indigenous children? We have more in care now than we ever had in residential school. You know, the finding of the bodies of all of these children, that's not a surprise for most of us. It's something that we all knew, but we have that many children that have disappeared and have been murdered, you know, in the last how many 100 years anyway, for sure, in all kinds of other horrible ways. I think that probably for me, the most important thing is, what are we doing for kids in trying to set things right? And if that can be looked after, I would personally be happy. Maybe it has to do with my age and because I have great grandchildren, but you know, education has to start at home with our kids. We have to have, you know, we have to be able to bring truth to our kitchen tables and talk about you know, what does that word mean? What does conciliation mean? What does reconciliation mean? And understand them. How many children know about residential schools? I was talking to somebody that I knew really well, and I know her really well just recently, and having her tell me that she doesn't tell her children about things like that because she doesn't want them to know about all of that negative stuff. As long as we think like that, there will always be negative things because we won't change them. So I believe that one of the really important things for us to do to honor those children whose bodies, whose graves have been found, is to for all of us to work to make change for all children. Because whatever is happening to our children is going to end up happening to yours too. Those things always, in the end, those are the things that all of our children inherit. And somehow that has to change. So I have nothing more to say to that.
Thank you. Terry, would you have anything to add to that one?
Well, a lot of things, you know, she's said it, but there's reaching to the children through the education system at all levels, right from elementary right on up to post-secondary. Like I say, like I mentioned earlier, those stories have to get out there. People have to know them, but they should be, the education systems themselves should be using more of our people who have the ability to convey those messages. And they're out there. There are a lot of survivors who are still alive. Why aren't they being used to speak to those classes? They can speak experientially because they know how it really was. You know, I have no problem sharing what I know about residential school because I lived it, and I did. You know, we talk about missing people, and there's so much of that going on, and we're losing so many people also, like, for example, right now to the opioid process. That whole thing of addictions, that's part of that whole addictions routine. You know, it was booze, it was drugs, and now amongst the drugs, the opioid thing is a real killer. And a lot of it is our people. We're losing people every day to these narcotics. And, you know, just not enough being done in that end of things. And but you also have to look at, of course, why are they taking those in the first place? What's being done about that? The preventive aspect. If you don't have prevention, then of course it's going to roller coaster, and we're going to see more of that continuing on down the road. Government really has to get their act together in that regard to provide more resources to deal with those kind of issues. Health, you know, our lives. That's number one thing. And by the same token, our environment, you know, it's crazy. We're, you know, Mother Earth, the sacred waters, the air, the animals, you know, they're all being impacted so terribly these days. And our ecosystem is endangered all the more. And long range, our great-grandchildren, what's going to be left there for them to have a good, healthy life? You know, we've got to start providing more doctors in many different aspects to take care of our world. Okay.
Thank you, Terry. This next question can be for either of you. What advice would you offer young Métis folks who are struggling with issues of identity? Terry, you can go first since you're smiling about it.
Yeah, you know, I always say that one of the biggest things is for people to get out there, get actively involved at the community level. You know, attend different functions, different events. There's so many different things that you can partake of, and non-natives as well can, you know, join in. Our doors are open to anybody and everybody to come and partake of these different events, because if people start doing that, and especially the non-Indigenous, then they're going to learn about our protocols, our ethics, our ways, our traditions, you know, our heritage, and, you know, but you've got to also meet and accept new friends in your life. You know, go out there and grab an Indigenous person as a friend. Make that kind of connection, and then take it from there, because through that one or more individuals, you will learn so much more. Take in and volunteer at some of the organizations like Native Counseling Services, the Native Friendship Centers, all these movements. They have all kinds of different programs. Here in Edmonton, Ben Caffro Society, Bent Arrow Traditional Healing Society, Red Road Healing Society. There's many different organizations people can get involved with, and that's how you will learn about us as people.
I guess the only thing that that I can add to that is it's not just Métis people who are having issues of identity. Those are, you know, I teach a course at university, and I taught for 20 years here in Saskatchewan. And identity is a big issue for everybody. It's not just for our people. I guess the people that I'm most concerned about are those kids that have been scooped up and are in foster care and coming home. But again, like Terry said, you come, you know, find a community, and especially because most people come back to urban areas, you know, find a community. There's always somebody that will know who your family is or know your family name. It's not that hard to trace your family if you've lost them, and communities are supportive. But you know, it really frustrates me when I hear this whole thing about Métis and identity, because a lot of that is to keep all of us confused, to make people believe that they have no identity, you know. And we're starting to believe that as Métis people. Our communities, you know, determine who we are, and they know our communities and our families. But if we keep talking about that, we make people that we have no identity, and that's frustrating. I think that lots of things can be done in universities about everybody's identity, and in particular Indigenous identities, by what we teach, the kinds of courses, the kinds of curriculum that we develop, and how we do that. A lot of work has been done and continues to be done by writers and by artists. That's probably where the best work is being done, is by artists and writers when it comes to identity issues. But I just don't buy that it's Métis people that have lots of problems with identity. I know that everybody else has that problem. They're losing their language and cultures because our world has totally changed and is so technical that, everybody is learning everything from grandmother Google instead of learning it from their grandparents or their families. We don't spend enough time with our families. We're all busy. We're carting them off to all sorts of things in the evening. You go play hockey, you go take dance classes, you do everything instead of sitting around the table telling stories and talking to them about who their families are and who their people are. So I think that as adults, we have to take some responsibility for that. But most of that is, it's something that everybody struggles with. People that immigrate and leave all of their stuff behind, their children are going to have identity crises, probably more than ours, because we're on our own land and territories, and we don't have to go across the ocean to find old people that'll tell us about our culture and help us to relearn our languages where it's harder for other people. I think that an example of that is people who have who came out of residential schools, the survivors. Yes, people have a hard time. There's been a lot of pain and all kinds of hardships that they've come through, but we're home. And our people are resilient and our communities are loving. As hard as times have been for me, and I'm sure even Terry can say the same thing. The majority of our people made community for us. People made community for me. Old people adopted me and taught me. There were some people that were nasty, but that's true everywhere. But one of the most loving and strongest communities are Indigenous communities when people come home. And when I say come home, I'm talking about looking for a cultural and a traditional place. There are always old people who will do everything in their power to help you with that. I know because I've experienced it. My children have experienced it. But it's easy to say people are going around looking for their identity. It's a way, and if we hear it often enough, we start to believe it. So, read books that are written by Indigenous people. That'll teach us lots. And for those of us that are in university, developing curriculum that helps a community understand their history. Up until a few years ago, all of our history was written by somebody else. It wasn't written by us. That's changing. We have people that are historians out there, and we certainly don't have to feel bad about what we're reading about ourselves anymore, like we had to at one time.
When I was teaching school up Bushwick in Northern Alberta, there was one thing that I got feedback from the students that really, really impressed me later. When I was going into my second year of education, I approached the principal and the school division to develop and implement a Native Studies program in the school. So he said, okay, we can work it through the Social Studies program. I says, great. So I developed a 3 grade level, grade 7, 8, and 9. So grade 7, it dealt with the early pre-contact period of Native history. And grade 8, you dealt with the historic period, like the late 1800s and the 20th century. And then grade 9s learned about contemporary life and situations and culture and history. And they were things that could be applied to so many different subject areas: science, social studies, phys ed. If you had a music program, you could tie in different things from the native world into the curriculum. And years later, after I had left the school, and those former students of mine were now adults raising their own families, I would see them on the street here in Edmonton, and they would come up and say, "Gee, Mr. Lusty, one thing I got to thank you for bringing us our culture," because they never had it. Their parents had been subjects of the residential school and so heavily influenced and impacted by the residential school experience that they never got their culture. They never learned their heritage. Although some parts of their heritage, they were, without realizing, they were in fact living it. And they'd been doing so since the day they were born. But there was so much else that could have been included in that. And now we're starting to see a little more of that come into the schools, but we need a lot more of it in the curriculum process. And you need it coming from the mouths of our people. That's where it's got to come from, because we know what it was.
Thank you, Terry. I'm just going to ask one last question before we wrap it up. And the question relates to learning. If you could recommend one book or one resource for people to start their learning journey on this topic, what would it be?
Oh, boy. Go ahead, Marie.
I guess the book that I would recommend is not by an Indigenous writer, but it's a book that really is honest when we talk about truth and reconciliation, about what happened on the plains, and that's the book called Clearing the Plains. And I can't for the life of me think of the author's name right now, but he's
James Dashak.
Yes, James Dashak, and it's a wonderful book. It's hard to read, but it talks about policies, epidemics, and starvation, and all of the kinds of things that happened on the prairies that most people just have never thought about because they've never read it in history. I think it's really an important book to read for especially non-Indigenous people. As far as other books by Indigenous people, I would recommend reading as many of the new young authors that are coming. There's some really powerful young writers and young artists, musicians that are singing, talking, writing poetry, writing novels that are depicting, you know, their life when we talk about generational kinds of things, but also really powerful things that give us hope. At least gives me lots of hope, and I'm positive everything is going to be okay. You know, we might have a few more years of hard times, but we're going to be a culture that's not going to die, or a people that's not going to die. And when I say we, I'm talking about Indigenous people, not just my own people, the Métis. I'm talking about everybody. And the same with our languages, because young people are doing amazing things. You know, they're starting language camps. They've got cultural camps, and these are not the kind that we went to. These are these are things that they're setting up themselves. There's such a resurgence of things that happen that we went through, people like myself and Terry in the 1960s, where there was a lot of excitement because we were reclaiming and we were speaking up for ourselves. And for a long time that hasn't happened because people have been dealing with all of the scoops and residential school and things. But there's this new group of young people who are coming forward, and it's exciting, the things that they're doing. So I feel really good. I don't know about truth and reconciliation and what's going to become of that. I don't think that people, a lot of people are taking it seriously enough. It's the kind of world we live in. You hear something on the news, and by next week there's something else in the news, and it just snowballs like that. It's easy for us to just, if it's not something we have to deal with every day, then we just set it aside. But we're not going to stop talking about it. And when people say, why don't you just get on with your lives? I think nobody says that to Jewish people when they talk about the Holocaust. Nobody says that to immigrant people who, come as refugees. So people shouldn't say that to us either. We're staying in our homeland and we're trying to put things to right for our families, and we have people that are willing to walk with us to do that, and we really honor those people. But I think that institutions have a whole lot more they can do. There's no such thing as, well, it takes a long time. I know that things in a university can change overnight if it's something that the university thinks is a priority. But I also know that if they don't think it's a priority, it won't happen for a long, long time. But I'm very hopeful about the kinds of things that our people are doing, and I have lots of faith in the young people that are out there, and the changes that they're going to make. Thank you.
There's a couple of resources I would certainly recommend, and one as just to ground people to get them started for a lot of those who don't have a lot of information or knowledge, is to pick up a book. Look for a book in the libraries. Some of them still have it, called Prison of Grass by Dr. Howard Adams. And Howard was a Métis professor. He used to teach down Berkeley, California, and very, very well known for his literary work. And he talks about a lot of the colonial system, the oppression that our people faced for so many decades, before coming into the 20th century. And pick up books that are written. There's different autobiographies out there. Like Maria's got, her book, Half-Breed, was a bestseller, and rightly so. It was a great story, and the way she told it was great. And you had April Raintree, there's a variety of books out there. But outside of the book thing, I would encourage you to go online and Google Indigenous publications or Indigenous newspapers. And that way you can get both contemporary and historical and cultural and political, all these different areas. You can get so much various information from, and a lot of it coming from people who are out there experiencing those aspects of life and putting them forward. And you can get those things online, or you can go to the libraries.
Thank you for that, Terry and Maria. That's going to wrap up today's session. And I would like to thank Zach, Marta, and Angie for helping us put this together. I'd also like to thank Ivy, who facilitated Terry's participation in this. And I'd like to finally thank Terry and Maria for a really thoughtful discussion on storytelling and the Truth and Reconciliation Day this week. If you'd like to join our mailing list, please contact Ivy Lalonde for any future sessions that we may have. And I would just like to say thank you to everybody today, and I hope you have a great weekend, and please stay safe, everyone.
Thank you and have a good day.
Yes. And thank you, everybody. Yesterday. Good to see you again, sir.
Thank you all.